Their conversations became the kind of fragile connection that grows in the shadows private, dangerous and barely understood by either of them. Catherine would bring him bits of information she overheard from guests at the dinner table, news from Mobile or Montgomery, political gossip from the north. Samuel, in return, would share scraps of stories he remembered from books he once held in his hands, or describe places he had seen only in sketches, harbors full of ships, large towns, where free black men walked openly, cities where the streets weren't bordered by cotton fields. Catherine listened as if drinking the world through him, but the world of the plantation saw everything. Even when lightning bugs were the only witnesses, the other enslaved workers noticed the way Catherine lingered near the laundry house, or how Samuel hesitated before returning to the quarters, as if reluctant to leave her. It became the quiet secret everyone pretended not to see. Caroline, however, did see. She watched the subtle shift in her twin, the glow in Catherine's cheeks. When she returned from her evening walks, the way she hummed to herself without realizing it. Caroline would never admit jealousy, not in words, but it lived in her like a splinter beneath the skin. She told herself that what bothered her wasn't Samuel himself, but the impropriety, the imbalance, the risk. But deep down, something more primal stirred. Catherine had taken something before Caroline even had the chance to want it. As the weeks turned into months, Caroline's gaze hardened. The household staff avoided her when she was in one of her moods, those quiet storms, where she walked the halls with a fan clutched so tightly her knuckles whitened. Rose, who worked closest to the sisters, learned to read the weather of their tempers. She knew that something dangerous was brewing long before the explosion came. One evening, near the end of summer, Catherine asked Samuel an innocent question. "What you dream about now?" Samuel hesitated. Dreams were luxuries for free men. But Catherine waited, her eyes soft in the dim light. "I dream," he said finally, "of a day when I choose where my feet take me." It was the gentlest way he could describe freedom, but it struck Catherine like a revelation. She began imagining a life beyond the iron gates of the estate, somewhere on the edge of the map where no one knew her name, where she could breathe without asking permission. She convinced herself it was possible. She convinced herself Samuel wanted the same thing she did, but hope can be a blinding thing. Catherine didn't understand how fear weighed on Samuel's every step. He had seen men whipped for far less, then secret meetings. He had known people sold away for simply being suspected of wanting more. The price of her dreams would be paid with his body, and Caroline, increasingly suspicious, became quieter, sharper. She watched everything. The way Samuel's eyes dropped when she entered a room. The way Catherine avoided passing him under her sister's stare. She asked questions in an icy tone that made everyone around her nervous. She dismissed servants abruptly. She snapped at Catherine over trivial matters, provoking arguments that left them both breathless. Yet, even in her anger, Caroline sensed something she had no name for, a shift in the air, an impending rupture. She began checking her father's ledgers for mentions of Samuel's work assignments. She watched Henley, the overseer, for signs he had noticed anything unusual. She listened for whispers from the quarters at night. But Rose was the one who sensed the danger most clearly. She had lived long enough on that plantation to know how quickly a single spark could turn into a blaze. She saw the glances between Catherine and Samuel. She heard Henley muttering about trouble and uppity behavior. She watched Caroline's jealousy harden into something colder, more brittle, and she feared deeply, instinctively, that Samuel would be the one to pay the price for everyone else's emotions. Then one night, as storms gathered on the horizon, and the air tasted of coming rain, Catherine told Samuel something that made his blood run cold. "We're leaving," she whispered urgently. "Tonight or tomorrow? I can no longer breathe here." Samuel stared at her, heart hammering. She spoke as if it were simple, as if two people, one white, one enslaved, could slip into the night and be welcomed by freedom. She spoke as if his life depended only on love, not on the brutal logic of the world around them. He tried to reason with her to slow her down, but Catherine's mind was a wildfire. The more he hesitated, the more she believed he didn't trust her. And when she looked at him with wounded eyes, Samuel felt trapped, caught between hope and terror. That night changed everything. It marked the point where quiet secrets became unstoppable momentum, drawing everyone, Catherine, Caroline, Samuel, Rose, and even Henley toward the catastrophe that would shatter the Yansy Plantation forever. What began as curiosity grew into affection, first on Catherine's part, then slowly on Samuel's. But Samuel's affection was cautious, a fragile thing born from moments stolen rather than freely claimed. When Catherine handed him a book one evening with a trembling smile, he felt something shift inside him. No one had given him a gift in years, not without expecting something in return. Yet here she was, offering him a small piece of her world, not as a mistress to a servant, but as a woman to a man, whose company she genuinely sought. Caroline sensed the shift before anyone said a word. She always had a talent for noticing changes in the air-tiny differences in tone. Pauses in speech, the quiet electricity between two people who thought they were hiding something. She knew the way Catherine's eyes followed Samuel across the yard, lingering a second too long. She despised the way Samuel looked back at her sister with something warmer than obedience, something dangerously close to admiration. For Caroline, the issue was not love or even jealousy. It was possession. Catherine wanting Samuel was in her mind, a theft of power, of order, of the fragile hierarchy Caroline clung to like armor. Catherine wasn't just stepping out of line. She was claiming something Caroline believed she alone had the right to control. Their rivalry, dormant for years, reignited into bitterness so sharp the entire household felt it. The tension became unbearable. Catherine's laughter grew forced in Caroline's presence. Samuel walked as if weighted by invisible chains, never knowing if Caroline's gaze was on his back. Rose noticed it too, the quiet, tight-lipped way Caroline moved through the house. Her eyes scanning corners as though expecting to catch shadows misbehaving. One night, Catherine finally whispered her truth to Samuel. They had met behind the greenhouse, the air thick with summer humidity and the buzzing of night insects. Catherine's hands were shaking when she grabbed his. She told him she wanted to run. She told him she had spent her whole life suffocating, under rules she never chose, and that loving him made the cage smaller, the walls tighter. Her voice cracked as she spoke about living somewhere, anywhere far from Alabama. She had no map, no money, no plan, only a desperate wish. Catherine believed that love itself was a kind of currency, something strong enough to carry them both across state lines and through danger. Samuel listened, torn between longing and survival. Her hope was intoxicating, yet terrifying. He knew. Caroline would stop at nothing if she discovered even a fraction of this. He knew men like Henley would relish the excuse to make an example of him. He knew the price of a failed escape, chains, lashes, the auction block, or death. But Catherine looked at him with that fierce, trembling hope, as if he were the only living thing left in a world that had already taken too much from her. He couldn't bring himself to say no. The situation reached its breaking point the night Samuel made the mistake of confiding in Rose. He hadn't intended to. Rose found him outside the laundry house, sitting on a crate with his head in his hands. She simply asked if he was all right, and something in her gentle voice cracked the restraint inside him. He told her Catherine was planning something dangerous. He didn't say the word escape, but Rose heard everything he didn't say. Her breath caught, her entire future flashed before her eyes in a single instant. Asterisk. Rose was young, no more than 20, but she had survived long enough on the plantation to understand the delicate, deadly balance that held everything in place. She had grown up, watching every shift in Caroline's mood, the tightening jaw, the sudden stillness that came before a burst of cold fury. She knew Catherine's impulsiveness like a familiar storm. She knew Henley's cruelty, how he beat first and asked questions later. And she understood, in a way Catherine never could, how fragile Samuel's life had become. Still, Catherine's desperation only grew. She moved through the house like a ghost with a secret agenda, stealing food from the pantry, tucking away extra clothing under her bed, slipping out at night to whisper instructions to Samuel in the dark hallways. Her naivety was as dangerous as fire in a dry field. Caroline, meanwhile, felt control slipping through her fingers. She sensed Catherine plotting something, and she sensed Samuel's involvement even before she saw them together. Her anger simmered beneath her skin like boiling water. She interrogated servants with icy precision. She searched closets and trunks for clues. At night, she walked barefoot through the hallway, pausing often, listening, waiting for whispers, for footsteps, for betrayal. And Henley, always attuned to danger real or imagined, began to sense the shift as well. He interpreted Caroline's growing panic as a sign of disorder, a threat to the plantation's fragile stability. In his mind, it was his responsibility to reassert control before the twins' emotions provoked open rebellion. To Henley, the solution was simple and brutal. Punish Samuel publicly. Break him. Break the whispers. Break whatever spirit was rising among the enslaved. In his warped logic. Fear was order. Pain was discipline. And a single display of dominance would send everyone, black and white, scrambling back into their proper place. What none of them realized was that their actions, their secrets, their jealousy, and their desperation had already set the match against the fuse, and the explosion was only a breath away. Rose saw all of this coming together like a storm gathering on the horizon. Her husband, Elijah, worked in the fields. If Henley believed there was unrest among the enslaved people, Elijah would be one of the first blamed. She could not risk that, not when she had a baby on the way, not when the air was thick with the threat of violence. She stayed awake through the night, praying, listening to the creaks of the house, trying to decide what to do. And then, just before dawn, she made the hardest choice of her life. She walked into Caroline's bedroom and confessed everything. She did it with shaking hands, knowing Caroline might punish her, knowing she might be condemning Samuel, but hoping desperately. To prevent something far worse, Caroline did not scream. She did not strike her. She simply rose, face cold and blank, and told Rose to dress quickly, because the night was about to end in blood if someone didn't take control. Caroline moved through the house like a storm, heading straight for the glass-walled greenhouse where Catherine and Samuel had planned to meet. Meanwhile, Henley, convinced he was on the verge of stopping a rebellion, armed himself and headed there too. Samuel waited in the greenhouse with trembling hands, praying Catherine would arrive before anyone else. She ran to him breathless, clutching the small bag she'd packed. They were about to leave when Caroline's voice cut through the humid air. "Going somewhere?" she said, her tone calm but trembling. Samuel stepped forward to shield Catherine. She grabbed his arm, insisting he come with her, insisting they still had a chance. Caroline's eyes flashed, not with heartbreak, but with disbelief that her sister had dared to disrupt the only order she respected. She hissed insults. Catherine screamed back, and Samuel tried desperately to keep peace between two women who had never known how to share anything. Henley burst in moments later, gun raised, shouting for everyone to stop. The shouting ricocheted off the glass walls. Catherine and Caroline collided in a struggle for the weapon. Samuel lunged to break him apart. Henley fired a warning shot into the ceiling, and the explosion of sound made everyone flinch. Then the second shot rang out ragged. Uncontrolled, deadly, Samuel's body jerked and he collapsed before he understood he had been shot. Catherine dropped to her knees, gathering him into her arms, sobbing his name over and over as if repetition might tether him to life. He tried to speak, but blood filled his mouth before the words could form. Henley stood frozen. Caroline, trembling, grabbed the gun from his hand, and in the chaos he stumbled backward into a workbench strewn with tools. A metal spike pierced his side, and he fell without a sound. The glass pane shook in the sudden silence. What happened in the hours that followed has never been definitively known. Some accounts say Catherine lost her mind and set fire to the house. Others claim Caroline turned on her sister, determined to erase all evidence of the night's betrayal. There were whispers that an uprising occurred, that enslaved workers saw their chance amid the chaos and exacted their own vengeance. By dawn, 17 people lay dead white and black alike, and the plantation stood half-burned, half-abandoned, haunted only by the smoke curling up through the morning air. The official documents were sealed for 73 years. When they were finally opened, historians found no ghost stories, no curses, no supernatural warnings, only a record of what happens when human beings are given absolute power over others. The tragedy at Yansy Plantation was not born of spirits or monsters. It was born of people, their desires, their fears, and the deadly consequences of a world built on ownership. That, in the end, was the true horror.